Dusk was engulfing the streets of the city, and with each step the darkness grew thicker, wrapping the streets in the cold breath of night. The dim street lights drew long, distorted shadows on the pavement, as if the city itself were engulfed in darkness, something lurking in its corners that could not be seen at first glance. Only the warm light reflecting off the shop windows made it possible to move confidently along the route. An ordinary evening. But someone may have already noticed how the air, still just light and unremarkable, began to fill with an elusive tension that could be felt in the body. At that moment, she, a middle-aged, black, confident woman, was stepping out onto one of these streets. She was walking home, and her steps were steady and unhurried, as if the whole world might be waiting for her, and she was in no hurry. But even in her posture there was something special, something that made her quite different from the others walking down the same street. She was a prosecutor. No one knew that, and her face was enough to keep anyone from guessing. But today, something was wrong. The sound of her footsteps seemed to fade into the whisper of the night. Her eyes were tired, but still determined. A long day at work, fighting for justice, this woman was the wall that stood between lawlessness and the law. She had everything she needed to feel safe, strength of character and confidence. But she didn't know that today would be different. An invisible threat she hadn't sensed even a moment ago became apparent. Somewhere nearby, in the shadows of one of the courtyards, just over the horizon of her vision, a silhouette appeared. A slight movement, as if someone had just started following her. A glance up, and a police patrol, hesitantly moving across her path, as if by chance they were close by. Her intuition kicked in instantly. Something was wrong, but she didn't even have time to think about what it was. Her steps quickening slightly, but not giving up. She wasn't going to run away. The squeak of brakes, the slight click of the car radio, a shadow, now clearly moving behind her. The inner chill she'd long ago learned to ignore begins to rise, but she still takes her time. This isn't just a fluke. "Stop!" The policeman's voice pierces the air. The tone left no room for doubt. Right now, she was about to find out just how dangerous this evening could be. Everything in her body is tense, but she doesn't stop. She's used to these moments. She knows how to handle these situations. Her gaze becomes steadier and her steps a little slower, to somehow gather her thoughts before the tension squeezes her chest. A police car rolls slowly down the street, its headlights catching the sparse figures of passers-by out of the darkness. Officer Thomas Grayson behind the wheel, white, 40 years old, 10 of them in this neighborhood. He's long since gotten used to thinking he knows the people here better than they know themselves. To him, the streets here are a living organism, and he's a surgeon, cutting out the unnecessary elements. He brings the paper cup of coffee to his lips, watching thoughtfully as a lone black woman crosses the road. It's not a big deal. No obvious signs of crime. An ordinary passerby who, if she were white, wouldn't even hold his gaze. But something about her irritates him, tugs at old habits hammered into him over the years. Too confident. No slouching, no hiding, walking quietly, not looking back. Thomas had long ago learned that if a black man walked down the street as if he owned the place, he was either hiding something or just didn't understand the world he lived in. He puts the coffee cup in the holder, squeezes the steering wheel a little. Suspicious, he mutters to himself as he turns on his radio. 747 Central. Suspicious figure, black female, alone, heading toward Willow Street. I'll run a check. The answer in the speaker is a dry accepted. No one asks unnecessary questions. In this city, it is enough to say black woman and suspicious, so that no one doubts the correctness of actions. Grayson parks at the sidewalk and slowly gets out of the car. His belt is equipped with the usual things: handcuffs, gun, baton, pepper spray, everything you might need if things go wrong. "Hey, miss!" His voice sounds loud, commanding, the way one is used to hearing in this neighborhood. The woman stops, turns around. She doesn't hurry, but she doesn't hesitate. Her eyes are cold, her gaze direct. It's already making Grayson angry. He's used to seeing fear in those eyes, indecision, a desire to end this conversation as soon as possible. But there's none of that here. He takes a step closer. "Show me your papers." His voice is a little rougher than usual. "What is the reason for the inspection?" asks the woman calmly. "I'm asking questions. Let me see some ID." He notices her squinting her eyes slightly, as if studying him. She's obviously thinking about something. Again, it irritates him. "Unless there's a legitimate reason to stop, officer, I'll continue on my way." Her voice is steady, confident. "Legal grounds?" He smirked, crossing his arms over his chest. "I think this is the first time I've seen you here. This is my neighborhood. I know everyone. Who are you?" The woman is silent. He can feel the tension building in her, but she doesn't show it. "You must be the kind of person who thinks you can do whatever you want." He continues, starting to walk slowly around her. "The kind of person who thinks the police are a joke, right? That you can just walk down the street and act like a queen?" She takes a deep breath. He notices how her hands stay in view, don't make any sudden movements. She's smart, but he still can't let her just walk away like that. "Put your hands on the hood," he says sharply. "You have no right to—" "Did you hear me, damn it?" He steps sharply closer. "Or should I help you do it?" He can already see the cold fire flaring in her eyes. She's clearly not used to being treated like this, but he's used to it. He's done it hundreds of times. People like her always broke, but she's not moving. "You don't want me to take that as resistance, do you?" He leans closer, almost whispering. She slowly, as if by force, raises her hands and places them on the hood of the patrol car. Grayson takes a step back, watching her. His mind was already racing with thoughts of how far he could go. There's something about that woman that pisses him off. Her posture, her calmness. He places his palm on her back, a little harder than necessary, making her feel his strength. "So, let's see what we have here." He grinned, starting to search her pockets. He doesn't know yet what mistake he's made. Let's pause for a moment. Write in the comments what city you are from and whether you are listening to our stories for the first time. Have you or someone you know had a similar case of injustice? How would you act in such a situation? Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the continuation of this story and other exciting stories. And now we continue. The woman's fingers grow cold as they rest on the hood of the patrol car. The smooth metal feels icy, but even that doesn't compare to the chill running down her spine. The cop stands behind her, his breathing short, impatient. He's enjoying the situation. "Well, miss," his voice sounds lazy, mocking. "Where are you hiding it? Maybe you got a stash in there, or a weapon. What do you call it? Street smarts." The woman inhales deeply, suppressing the rage bursting forth. "Officer, I demand an explanation. On what grounds are you searching me?" Grayson smirks, not stopping moving his hands over her clothes as if looking for something to justify his actions. "Demanding, huh?" He pressed lightly on her shoulder, forcing her to squeeze harder. "Baby, you're not demanding anything here." He pauses deliberately, enjoying the way his words sink into her. You are committing a gross violation of the law. Her voice is tense, but there is no tremor in it. She's holding it together. Grayson grins. The law? What law? What are you talking about? He looks around, making sure there aren't too many witnesses around. I know you. I've seen your kind. You're always the same. You talk about breaking the law when you want to avoid trouble. But I'll tell you what, you are the problem. Her fists clench, but she doesn't let her emotions take over. I need to call my lawyer, she says calmly. Grayson grins wider, his teeth gleaming in the light of the streetlights. A lawyer? He laughs. Oh, of course. You all have lawyers. What are you going to say? That I did my job? That you've been walking down the street where you don't belong? He takes a step to the side, easing the pressure a little, but stays close to make it clear. He's in control. Okay, let's see who you are. He yanks her bag out of her hands, not even giving her a chance to protest, unzips it, and starts going through her things. The woman bites her lip. She knows that resisting will only make things worse. So, wallet, keys. He goes through things with deliberate slowness. What have we got here? He pulls out his ID card, looks at the photo, then shifts his gaze to her. Oh, is that a picture of you? He smirks, lifting the card higher to get a better look. Wow, I don't often see people like you wearing something like that. The woman is silent. The position. He reads further, then suddenly frowns. Something's wrong. He reads it again. Is this a joke? He looks at her, but now with a slight strain in his eyes. Is this some kind of fake? He lowers his gaze to the ID again. State's attorney. His fingers clench involuntarily on the plastic as he realizes the mistake he's just made. But he doesn't let himself let it show. He laughs, but not so confidently anymore. That's a twist. The woman looks up at him, not fear in her eyes, not pleading, not a plea, just an icy calm. Get your hands off me, officer, she says quietly. And for the first time all evening, he has the feeling that he's crossed a line he shouldn't have crossed. Grayson looks at the ID card in his hands. He rereads each letter, but the meaning does not immediately come to him. State's attorney. This woman is not just another black woman who is poking around the streets in the wrong neighborhood. She is someone who is above him in the system, someone who could destroy his career with one phone call. But he won't give up that easily. Grayson looks up, and something changes in his face. A sense of slight panic flashes in his eyes for a moment, but then it turns to anger. Is this some kind of joke? His voice sounds harsh, rough. He clutches the ID card in his fingers. The woman doesn't answer. She just stands there, still looking at him calmly. It pisses him off. What? You think just because you have a piece of paper with pretty letters on it, you're better than the others? He comes closer, almost right up to me. You think you're allowed more than the rest of us? He speaks slowly, squeezing each word like a snake injecting venom. You know what I see? He walks around her, slowly running his hand along the hood of the car. I see a black woman who has forgotten her place. She tenses up. Inside, everything clenches, but outwardly, she doesn't show an ounce of emotion. And you know what the funny thing is? He chuckles, tossing her ID back on the hood like garbage. You're one of them anyway. He leans closer, almost whispering, Whoever you are, prosecutor, judge, goddamn senator, at the end of the day, you're just like everyone else. just like the people I pick up on these streets every day." The woman is silent. She can feel her insides churning, but she knows that if she gives in to her emotions, he will win. "Let's be honest, prosecutor." He emphasizes the last word, as if mocking. "We both know how you got this job. Who did you spread your legs to get you in that office?" He smiles, watching her face intently, searching for the slightest emotion to stomp on. She clenched her teeth, but didn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her anger. "Keeping it together, huh?" He clucks his tongue. "Oh, that's right. You've been told since childhood. Don't look a white man in the eye. Don't speak loudly. Don't argue, or it will be worse." He leans closer, his lips almost touching her ear. "Maybe you're afraid of me." The woman takes a deep breath. "No," she replies calmly. Grayson freezes for a moment. That answer cuts him worse than a knife. "You're not afraid?" He grinned, but his voice got a little louder. "I should be." His fingers suddenly touch her shoulder, slide down the sleeve of her jacket. The woman pulls back sharply, her eyes flashing, and now she's looking directly at him. Grayson smirks. "Oh, what's wrong? You don't like to be touched?" His voice becomes drawn out, venomous. "That's weird. I thought you were the kind who liked to be touched by white men." He takes a step closer, hovering over her again. "You like it, don't you? That power, that fear, that submission." Her hands clench into fists. The rage inside her is already bubbling. "You're a creep," she says coldly. Grayson froze. He hadn't expected this. "What did you say?" "You're a pathetic, miserable bastard who hides behind a badge because without it, you're nothing." His face darkens. "Say it again." She looks him straight in the eye. "I said that you, shut up." His voice rumbles, tearing the air. But now he's not only angry, he's afraid. And for the first time all evening, he realizes that this woman isn't just a victim. She's the problem. His problem. And he doesn't know how to solve it anymore. Silence hung between them for a few seconds. The tension that had swelled to its limit now pulsed in the air, weighing on his chest like a heavy weight. Grayson stared at the woman, his eyes glittering with anger and something else. Maybe fear, maybe the realization of a mistake he didn't want to admit. The woman straightened up, looking directly at him. "Do you realize you're committing a crime? Unlawful detention, abuse of authority, harassment. I'm not going to let you get away with this." Her voice was calm, but inside her everything was clenching. She realized that this situation was getting out of control. Grayson shook his head slowly and squinted his eyes as he smirked. "Oh, so that's it, huh?" He took a step closer so that now there were only a few centimeters between them. "Are you threatening me, Negro?" He savored each word, enunciating it with venom as if spitting it out. The woman didn't flinch, didn't take her eyes away. "It's not a threat, it's a fact." His jaw clenched. Something inside him flared, ignited with hatred. She wasn't afraid, and that was the worst of it. Grayson abruptly removed the handcuffs from his belt. "All right, that's enough. You're under arrest." The woman blinked. She hadn't misheard? "On what grounds?" she asked, but inside she could already feel something sinking in. "On the grounds that you are acting suspiciously, refusing to obey the officer's lawful request, obstructing the investigation, and resisting." He spoke clearly, confidently, as if he were reading from a memorized script. "It's a lie." Her voice trembled, but not from fear. It was anger. "Ah, lies?" He smirked, starting to approach. "Who's going to believe it? You?" She took a step back. "Officer, I'm warning you. This is illegal." He cast a quick glance at her, scanning his surroundings. People. There were. Some were watching, but, as always, afraid to interfere. This was his neighborhood, his territory. His word was law here. He reached for her wrist. Hands behind your back. Now. The woman took another step back, but she already knew she had no choice. I'm not going anywhere with you. Her voice was firm. He grabbed her forearm. Strong fingers dug into the skin. You're coming, bitch. Her heart raced. A chill ran down her spine. She'd always known these situations happened. She'd seen them on the news in cases she'd looked into. She knew they ended badly. But I didn't think I'd end up in this hell myself one day. She yanked her hand sharply, but he squeezed it tighter, causing her body to jerk forward. Let me go, she shouted, but he was already twisting her arm behind her back. A jolt. She slammed her hip against the hood of the car. Are you resisting arrest? His voice was drenched in sarcasm. I didn't commit any crime. Now you have. The handcuffs clicked on her wrists. A crowd was beginning to gather. A few people pulled out their cell phones. Grayson noticed it, but he didn't care. Let's go. He yanked her shoulder sharply, forcing her to step forward. The metal of the handcuffs cut into her skin, rubbing her wrists painfully. Her heart was pounding, but she didn't let herself snap. She didn't scream. She didn't beg. But inside, she knew it wasn't just a test. It's a real risk. And if she doesn't get out of that car alive, no one will know who she really was. The metal of the handcuffs cut into her skin, leaving thin red streaks. The woman felt her hands begin to go numb from the pressure. But the pain wasn't the worst part. What was worse was the cold realization of what was happening. She was dragged down the street like a criminal, a jolt to her back. She barely kept her footing. Move, you black bitch! His voice was full of contempt. He didn't even try to hide it. Everything inside her was turning upside down. Her breath hitched, but not from physical exertion, from rage, from powerlessness, from being turned into a spectacle. People started to stop. Some raised their phones, taking video. Some were whispering, looking at each other. But no one interfered. What are you looking at? Grayson shouted at the crowd. You feel sorry for her, don't you? She's just a black woman, another thief. You think she's got a good job? Ha! She's probably living on welfare like the rest of them. The crowd didn't react. He smiled gloatingly and squeezed her shoulder again, moving closer to her ear. Do you like it when everybody looks at you? Come on, smile. You're used to being the center of attention, right? The woman gritted her teeth, but kept silent. She knew that if she said a word, he would find a way to use it against her. But it was all churning inside. Is this really how it's going to end? She's a prosecutor, a person who knows the law better than he does. And still, now she's no better than an ordinary passerby who was stopped for suspicious appearance. Another tug, harder now. She staggered, tripping. God, you're clumsy, Grayson said with a grin. And you can't walk properly. No wonder there are more of you in prisons than in colleges. She raised her gaze to his, sharp, icy. You can humiliate me, but you know you're committing a crime. He froze. And again, that confidence of hers, that posture of hers, even now, when she's handcuffed, when everyone's looking down at her. You don't know who you're messing with, officer. Her voice was firm. He yanked her sharply behind him. Shut up, bitch. It was at this point that someone in the crowd shouted out, Hey, are you sure this is legal? There was a tense silence for a second. Grayson clenched his teeth. He turned around, scanning the crowd. A guy in his early 20s was holding his phone right in front of him, filming everything that was going on. "Put that down before I confiscate it," Grayson growled. "I know my rights. This is a public place I can film." Grayson felt irritation growing inside him. But then he grinned. "Take as many pictures as you want. Just get another video of your rotten breed thinking they can walk wherever they want." The woman stopped abruptly. Rotten breed? It was the first time she'd ever said it out loud. He grinned. "Why, is that not true? You think you deserve respect? You are filth thieves, whores who need to be put in your place all your lives. Look around you. No one can help you. You're nothing anyway." She felt her breath catch. Her dignity was being torn apart, not because he was saying it, but because he could say it out loud, without fear, without consequence. She realized he was confident of his victory, and it was at that exact moment that something else flared up inside her. It's not over yet. Let's pause for one more brief moment. Write in the comments where you're hearing this story from, and whether you or someone you know has faced similar injustice. What would you do in such a situation? Your thoughts are important. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the continuation of this story and other exciting stories. Now to continue. Grayson felt his fingers shake as he pushed the woman into the patrol car. His confidence was slowly beginning to shake, like she was glass that was cracking harder with each step. She was fighting back, but even scarier was how calmly she did it. No tears, no silent supplications, just a cold, icy calm that stabbed into him like a knife. He opened the door and she got in. He grabbed her arm, pulling her against the seat, and closed the door. The car was dark inside, and his own breathing seemed deafeningly loud. "That's it. I'm doing my job," he told himself over and over again. But he couldn't shake the feeling. It grew like a shadow creeping up behind him, filling his mind with doubt. Somehow, things were not as they usually were. This woman, she was different, not like all the others he usually arrested. He felt like she knew something that was beyond his comprehension. She didn't look like a criminal. That feeling wouldn't let him go. "You're wrong." Her voice was as calm as ever, but there was no fear in it, just confidence, and it hit him again. "What did you say?" Grayson's voice was harsh, almost aggressive. "You're wrong, officer." She spoke tonelessly, unstressed, but there was something subtly important in her words. "It will be hard for you to justify your actions." He clenched his jaws, trying to suppress this anxiety that was growing stronger with each step. But his pride wouldn't let him back down. He was a cop, after all. He was right. He'd always been right. "Shut up, you goddamn bitch," he said sharply, but the words didn't come out of him with the same confidence. The woman only looked at him silently, and something inside Grayson twitched again. He felt her gaze like a steel blade penetrating his soul, upsetting his fragile equilibrium. He was ready to justify himself, to silence her, but somehow it wasn't so easy. He looked at her again, but her gaze did not avert, did not waver, and suddenly a feeling came over him that he couldn't understand. Confusion. This moment was like a crack in his convictions. He felt his confidence, like an inflated balloon, suddenly deflate. Anxiety grew inside him, and he tried to fight it, but the feeling was overwhelming. He turned abruptly to get into the car, wanted to just drive, just forget about it, just do his job. But her words wouldn't let him go. "Do you really think I won't have anything to lose?" she said suddenly. Grayson didn't answer. He only twitched when he heard her words. It was strange. It was like his heart skipped a beat. This wasn't normal. She's the one under arrest. She's the one who should be down, and he's the one who determines who's right and who's wrong. But somehow it was as if she held him in her power. His eyes searched for a glance in the rearview mirror, but his reflection no longer seemed so sure. He felt her gaze on him again, like someone who wouldn't let him walk away from the truth he was trying to hide, and something inside clenched again. He could turn things around, make her talk, demand more, but what if she was right? What if he wasn't right all along? He squeezed the steering wheel. It doesn't matter. None of it matters. He couldn't go back. His pride wouldn't let him admit his mistake. He who doubts loses. He who succumbs to weakness is weak. He can't be weak. He cannot lose this battle. But the doubt in him didn't disappear. The car was dark and stuffy. There was tension inside. Grayson sat behind the wheel, his eyes sliding over the dark streets through the windshield, but his thoughts were far away. The woman beside him didn't say a word, just sat there, like a half-forgotten shadow in that cramped space. He felt her silence like a cold heaviness. It was not just a silence. It was a silence that pressed down on him, making him question what he had done. But pride, that damned feeling, wouldn't let him turn back. Grayson felt something inside him crack, the confidence that had seemed unshakable a few minutes ago now crumbling. He tried to focus, to chase those thoughts away, but they came back again and again. Why wasn't she fighting back? Why was she so calm when everyone else he'd arrested had behaved differently? Why didn't her gaze waver for a second? She was something more than just another victim he could easily break. That realization pressed like a cast-iron stone on his chest. He couldn't understand why she acted the way she did, but he was sure of one thing. She definitely knew something he didn't. He was a cop, and she was just another woman on the streets for him to pick up. The woman finally broke the silence, her voice hard and harsh like a hidden threat. "You probably don't know who you're dealing with." Grayson turned sharply toward her, his gaze full of irritation, but she didn't lower her eyes. She met his gaze, and something in her eyes made him feel like he hadn't really seen her. He was used to being in command, used to having all his victims fall before him, and he got what he wanted. But here, with this man, something was wrong. "Who are you to tell me I don't know who I'm dealing with?" His voice was rough, but something inside started to stir. The woman looked up at him, her gaze even firmer, and at that moment, as if in response to his silent pressure, she spoke words that tore his confidence to shreds. "I'm a state's attorney." The words echoed in his head like a punch to the gut. Grayson froze, his hand that had just been gripping the steering wheel weak and trembling. He looked at her sharply. "What?" He almost couldn't believe his ears. "You? What?" Her face remained calm, but there was a hardness in her voice that made his heart beat faster. "I am a prosecutor, an officer. I work for a government agency. I represent law and justice, and I will not remain silent about this incident. You're committing a crime by arresting me without probable cause. You broke the law, and you will definitely answer for it." Grayson felt his stomach curdle with fear and confusion. It was as if he were standing on the edge of a precipice, and the world around him was suddenly very small. He tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come out. He opened his mouth to say something, but only shook his head silently. She was a prosecutor. She was the kind of person he faced in court every day, but never thought he would one day find himself on the other side of the law. His head began to spin. Everything he knew about his power, about his right to control, vanished into thin air. His confidence crumbled like a house of cards, and suddenly he realized that this whole situation was a mistake, a catastrophic mistake. He didn't know who he was dealing with. "Are you out of your mind?" Her voice cut through the silence again. "You think I'm going to let you humiliate me just because you wear a badge?" Grayson gritted his teeth, trying to regain some control of himself, but the feeling of confusion wouldn't let go. He wasn't prepared for this turn. She wasn't just a woman he could send to the station and forget. She was part of the system, part of a world he could probably no longer control. On Zdel Ashipku, and that mistake could cost him everything. He glanced sharply in the rearview mirror. The car was moving down the road, but Grayson felt the world around him shrinking. There was only one thing on his mind. He had to find a way out now. But he didn't know what it was. A moment of shame and confusion. Everything he thought was right was crumbling, and he felt his confidence in his own actions, in his right, fading. The car moved along the deserted road, but to Grayson it felt as if everything around him had slowed down. Time lost its meaning, and his thoughts raced through his head like wild animals trying to find a way out. The woman sat silent, her eyes hard and calm, but Grayson felt every word she said, every silence piercing him from the inside, tearing him to pieces. He couldn't shake the thought that everything he'd done had been a mistake. He realized that he had done something irreparable. He had been a policeman, an officer of the law, and now he was nothing more than a criminal who had hurt a woman, humiliated her, illegally arrested her. And worse, she was a prosecutor. She could have destroyed his career, his life. His gaze darted around the interior of the car, trying to find an excuse for himself. He tried to convince himself that it was all necessary, that she was suspicious, that he was just doing his job. But the more he thought, the more one thing became obvious. His actions were not dictated by the law, but by his own preconceived notions and fear. It was more than a mistake. It was a crime. "You don't even realize what you've done, do you?" Her voice broke his musings, and Grayson felt his body tense to the breaking point. She spoke to him as if he were not a cop, but a child, unable to understand what he was doing. He tried to shut those thoughts out again, but he couldn't. One thing was going through his mind. What if this all ended up being not just a dismissal, but a real punishment for him? What if she just started talking? Grayson tried to concentrate on just getting her to the station, but all he could see was her calm face. Every word she said into his head cut deeper and deeper. He saw her before him not as a woman, but as a representative of the system that would now look at his actions and judge them. He was sure that in her eyes he was already condemned, and that feeling of heaviness that was building in his chest wouldn't let him go. He felt his world crumbling, his ideology, his belief in the fairness of the system. It was all shattered in an instant. He was no longer sure who he was. "You can't just go on like this." Her words sounded like a sentence. She spoke softly, but each word penetrated his soul, exposing his weaknesses. He was a policeman. He was supposed to uphold the law, but in this case he was not a defender, but a lawbreaker. He humiliated her. He beat her. He destroyed her dignity. All his actions, all his confident actions, were now turning against him, and he could not shake it off. With every word of her voice, he lost confidence. She didn't fall before him. She didn't run away. She didn't beg for mercy. She simply stood like a stone wall, watching his inner destruction. He could feel his pride, which had once been his defense, now turning to dust. How could he let himself do this? How could he not see that this was not just an arrest, but violence he had committed? Grayson tried to justify himself, repeating in his head, "I was right. She broke the law. I was protecting order." But the more he tried to justify his actions, the more empty they became. He knew he couldn't convince himself of that. At some point, his inner world just fell apart. He realized that his world was built on lies. Scenes from his job flashed through his mind. How he arrested people every day, how he'd felt more than once that he was in control of their lives. But it was different now. He had become the very person he himself was defending the law against. He had become the enemy. His own actions had brought him to this point, and even if he brought her to the station now, he would no longer be the man he was before. His actions have left an indelible mark on him. "You're afraid, aren't you?" Her voice again, and he couldn't hide his confusion any longer. He turned his head sharply in her direction, but he couldn't say anything back. He was afraid. He was afraid that he would lose everything he held dear. He was afraid that her words would now be true, afraid that everything he believed in would be destroyed. He finally realized, this isn't just a mistake. It was his downfall. Several weeks had passed since that unfortunate incident. Time had not lightened the weight Grayson was carrying. His life, as he knew it, was crumbling. Condemning words were already being sung in his name, like a sentence resounding in every corner of the city. He could no longer face his colleagues calmly, and every day, every moment brought only new aggravations of inner conflict. He tried to justify himself, but he realized that he could not get his life back. The woman, meanwhile, had begun to act. Once she was safe, her quiet silence became her weapon. She realized that silence was not a solution, but a fear that would keep everyone in its grip. She couldn't let this incident overshadow her life, her career. She knew that if she remained silent, this situation would just be another story of justice being broken, another innocent victim left unprotected. She went public with what happened, posting details of the incident, and soon her name became a symbol of the struggle. None of this, of course, would have been possible without what happened to her. A prosecutor in her system could not simply be an idle witness to injustice. She made a statement that shocked the public. It wasn't just breaking the law, it was violence. I cannot allow such actions to go unchecked. Her words became the catalyst for change. At first, they didn't believe her, but then the evidence started coming in, testimonies from other victims. Cases similar to her own were coming to the surface, creating a powerful wave of outrage. People began to suggest that if the system continued to protect people like Grayson, nothing would change. His face became a symbol of everything that is wrong with law enforcement. Word of his actions spread, and Grayson found himself at the center of an investigation that uncovered not only his actions, but also systemic problems within the police force. With each day, with each new testimony, more and more facts about racism and abuse of power came to light. This was more than a personal mistake. It was a symptom of a disease that was hard to ignore. Grayson couldn't hide anymore. His career began to decline. Soon he was removed from office and brought to trial. His name was in the papers, and his actions became an example of how even someone who is supposed to uphold the law can be a lawbreaker. He tried to defend himself, but his excuses did not sound convincing. He faced his own injustice, and all his attempts to justify himself only added to his downfall. In public appearances, she said, "I'm not just a prosecutor. I am a woman who has faced racism and violence. I can no longer afford to remain silent when the world is falling apart around me. Her name has become more than a symbol of the struggle for truth. It became a symbol of the fight for equality, for the right to be heard, for the right to justice, regardless of color or status. And even if it meant ruining someone's life, she was ready to go all the way, because she knew that silence and passivity lead to injustice. Grayson couldn't run anywhere else. He had become the object of ridicule, scorn, and all that he himself had delivered to others at some point. He was the one who humiliated, who maliciously used his power to break fortunes. Now he himself found himself broken, with no chance of recovery. His life was shattered, and he didn't know how to get back on the road he had gotten off of years ago. He was part of a system that served power, not truth. And now that the truth had come out, he couldn't go back. The woman he was trying to humiliate became the face of change. She showed everyone that every vote counts, and that even one wrong decision can cost everything. Her fight was not just for herself, but for all those who faced daily injustice. In a world where every choice can affect someone's fate, she proved that only actions matter. What do you think about this story? Have you experienced racism in your life? Your thoughts and experiences are very important to us because each of you is an integral part of this story. We value each and every one of you, and your opinions help us move forward. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and give us a like if you enjoyed the story. We wish you a good day, and don't forget to write a subject line so we know you listened to the end.